So my name's Matt Werfel. I'm here today with John at the CPU. Thanks, John, for having us.
No, thanks for coming in
today. And I guess I'm here as a result of Asbestos Awareness Week, and knowing that the electrical trades union and plumbers, have exposure at times to dealing with in situ asbestos as well. I thought I'd come down for a chat.
Yeah, absolutely right. Many of our members are exposed or potentially exposed to asbestos in the workplace, in new installations and old installations. We know that asbestos continues to be imported into Australia, and it is something which threatens the life and health of our members right across the state. So thanks for coming in.
No, that's okay. And why I'm particularly concerned is I myself have been exposed to asbestos in situ in my rental properties that I renovated when I was a young fella in the early 2000s, and as a result I've got mesothelioma, and that required that I had to undertake chemotherapy and radiotherapy, it's a terrible health outcome in which apparently there is no cure for. And so it is my duty as an ex-union official myself. I used to work in warehousing for the SDA. And I feel like it's my duty to come and talk to you and your members about the hazards of asbestos in their workplaces, but indeed even their own homes when they're undertaking renovations.
And how was it that you became exposed, Matt? Could you tell us about that?
I was renovating the outside of my houses, and it was subsequently found that the eaves of the house contained asbestos, and indeed weatherboard on the outside of the house contained asbestos as well. And just like any home that was built a long time ago, they need painting, repairing and bogging and sanding and drilling and things like that. And unbeknownst to me, they contained asbestos. So that was back in the early 2000s, there's no warning labels, very little information going back then about asbestos, and even to this day there is very little information. You won't really find it in hardware stores or when you're watching these TV shows in which they're renovating houses and they make it look glamorous and they're knocking down walls with sledgehammers and all sorts of things. Very few times will you ever hear them talking about asbestos. And there's a very good point, given that with the times that we're facing with the pandemic, a lot of people have been doing home renovations and possibly have exposed themselves. There's a terrible statistic where 1 in 3 homes built before 1990 contain asbestos. But this is where people should have their homes tested, if that's the case, knowing this. But there needs to be a public awareness campaign about it. Tradespeople quite often will undertake some sort of training, but once again, that information different from state to state, and sometimes the training providers themselves will provide different information.
So what was the consequence of your exposure to asbestos?
Well, the consequence to me is, that I now have a life-threatening illness that I've had to have, sorry, and it's a bit hard to talk about sometimes, John, but I've had to have numerous health interventions, starting with, I had 2 separate operations. For how I first found out about it is I had a lump on the inside of my right leg, as many males do, you think it will just go away. And, you know, it was through my wife telling me you should go see the doctor about it, and then I did. That then led to operations in which they found a large, I don't even know what you would call it, like a cancerous mass near my stomach, and I had to have all of that cut out. Now, that then led to 6 weeks of radiotherapy, 5 days a week, and then 4 months of chemotherapy. Now,
Those treatments would have had a serious impact on your health, I imagine.
yeah, terrible. You know, like I now have lymphedema in my right leg, which is basically swelling up of my leg. I have to get that treated quite often. I wear a compression stocking as a result. Extreme tiredness. Every 6 months, and this is coming up next week, every 6 months I have to get a CT scan in which they scan my chest and abdomen and look for any further growth. So basically I live in a 6 monthly holding pattern. Once again, terrible statistics in this area. Australia was one of the largest users of asbestos, up to 11 million tonnes in the built environment. 40,000 tonnes dumped every year, whether it's illegally or legally. You know, absolutely terrible. 4,000 deaths per year, twice Australia's road toll.
Yeah.
You know, why isn't this being talked about? You don't see it on TV, yet every night you'll turn the news on and they'll have a car accident of some type, or there'll be ads about, you know, not to speed and all of these things. It is absolutely terrible, those, you know, people that pass away from car accidents as well, but equally terrible as people that pass away from asbestos-related disease. Australia is still, unbeknownst to us, importing asbestos from asbestos-containing materials from other nations where they don't have similar bans.
Yep.
There was a 730 report recently where they'd found it had tainted some gyprock product, as well as, and this is absolutely disturbing, some children's toys.
Crayons, I know.
Yeah, unbelievable. And it's a shocking indictment upon those countries that they continue to allow asbestos to be legally mined and manufactured, I guess. And then, equally as worse, we're not able to pick that up before it hits the docks and lands in our homes and in our workplaces.
Yeah, we know the Border Force only inspect a tiny fraction of the containers that come into Australia, and of that tiny fraction that they inspect, quite a high proportion of goods are found to contain asbestos, and that gives us an indication of just the volume of asbestos that we continue to import, and that threatens people's lives. So you've been through some of the really horrible health consequences of exposure to asbestos. What advice would you give our members when it comes to asbestos in the workplace?
Look, first of all, it would be about making sure you've had adequate training. So whether that was when you're an apprentice, or if it's something that you need to upskill yourself, or just, you know, go back over every now and again. So training, number one. Identification of asbestos is difficult simply because it looks like every other product that's out there as well in a lot of cases. So if you suspect it's asbestos, you need to make sure that it gets tested. That testing will then determine as to whether it is or it's not, and what you need to do from there.
Because testing can only be done in a lab, can't it? Testing to identify whether a material is asbestos is something that needs to be done by an accredited laboratory.
Yes.
Someone with a microscope that can look at the material and clearly ID it. because you can't tell just by looking at it, can you?
No, that's right. And indeed, that's when you would need to report it. You know, so reporting it to your site manager, reporting it to your supervisor, talk to your colleague about it. Just make sure that people know about it. And then once that reporting's done and that investigation's done and it's come back whether it is or it isn't, that's when you could determine what you're doing next.
Yeah. Because the critical thing, of course, if you suspect it's asbestos, don't touch it. If you've reported it and there's testing been done and it comes back that it is asbestos, don't touch it. This is when we need to call in someone who is trained and accredited in asbestos removal. Professionals that do this work for a living. They are the only people that have got the adequate skills, training, PPE and other resources to deal with this properly.
Once again, that is exactly right. It becomes dangerous once it's disturbed. So don't touch it. You suspect that it is, it needs to go through that investigation and reporting process. Not disturb, fine in situ. As soon as it's broken up, sawn, drilled, sanded, whatever the case is, that's when it becomes dangerous and hazardous to your health.
So the short message is, if you think it's asbestos, don't touch it, get it tested, and then get it dealt with properly by professionals.
Look, it's a sobering subject to talk about, John. I do appreciate your time today to discuss it. All I can say is that your union has a proud history of standing up for its members, and this is another way to stand up for them to make sure that their health and safety is looked after. So I appreciate your time, John.
Thanks for coming in, sharing the story
Cheers.
and spreading awareness. Thanks, Matt. Great
Thank
work.
you.
See ya.
Cheers.